the meat of today's rant is all about junk training. And lo and behold, I have some inspiration from Dr. Peter Attia. So I spent 15 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, and in those 15 years, I racked up a few injuries, a little bit of battle damage. What that led to was just a lot of pain and just a lot of grumpiness. And in order to combat that, I had to start learning. And what I learned was a substantial amount of mobility training. And I took all that knowledge so that I can write my book, The Nimble Warrior, and have it sent to you for just the cost of shipping and handling. So if you head to thenimble.warriorbook.com, you can grab yourself a copy just for the cost of shipping and handling, and you'll find out all the nitty gritty on how I got my back and knee and hips and shoulder and every other part of my body tracking in the right direction, which has allowed me to not only be a happier human being, but also I'm able to do the sports that I've always loved my entire life. So head to thenimble.warriorbook.com, get your copy today. I'll sign it and donate $1 to Warrior Adventures Canada.
Welcome to the Hard to Kill podcast, the go-to podcast for military, LEO, and EMS professionals, sharing ideas and experiences from around the world to make you hard to kill. Here's your host, Dave Morrow.
All right, so another episode flying solo here on the Hard to Kill podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget, if you're liking what you're hearing right now, if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. You're getting all this free content. Play the game. Let's get some reciprocity going on here. And drop some comments. Start engaging. Man, I love it when you guys engage. And I'm just going to read out some of the comments that I've got just recently here. And they pump me up, man. Not going to lie. Not going to lie. And if you reply on YouTube, man, I'm responding to comments too. So let's just check this out, man. I got 2 cool new comments. I want to share them with you. So I've got one from PJ9K. Very interesting and informative podcast. Dave Morrow can really relate to his guests and makes the discussion very engaging. Great guests and topics that would interest a wide audience, not just soldiers and first responders. Thanks, PJ9K. 5 stars. Thanks, bro. And solid podcast. This is from Gary June. And I recently found the podcast, and it's now one of my favorites. Perfect content for crushing my gym workouts. Thanks, Gary June. Much appreciated. 5 stars. Guys, this is the way that we affect more lives moving forward. It goes out into the atmosphere, into the ether. But the more you guys interact, the more you guys subscribe, the more you guys comment, the more people get my voice dialed into their ear holes. And this is how we affect change. So those of you that are already listening, because you're listening right now, much appreciated. And I want to send out a massive thank you for listening to the podcast, whether it's once, twice, 3 times a lady. Doesn't matter. We're over 20,000 downloads. This is mind blowing. I never thought I'd be at 20,000 downloads when I was just doing this in my basement with a shitty iPhone headphone set. I didn't know where this would go, and we're getting very close to 100 episodes, and it's all thanks to you. So with that said, we got a lot on the go here. I wanted to go over just a few things that are happening within the Hard to Kill community and make sure that you're tracking so that you can get the most high-speed information possible. So we've got a new pod out, new podcast episode. It was released on Wednesday, and this episode is with Dr. Mark Beauchamp and Rupert Whitting. So they are part of the University of British Columbia team. Dr. Mark Beauchamp is the lead researcher for the PASS program and for the PACE program. Now, why is this important? Well, it's because in collaboration with myself and Dave Morrow PT, we are doing a collaborative study on the effects of PT on exercise for, in my case, specifically for retired female cav veterans to see the qualitative and eventually quantitative benefits of partaking in an exercise program, in this case online, and we're using our backbone of the Athena program. So that episode just dropped this week on Wednesday if you're interested in getting involved in those programs. So if you're a Canadian Armed Forces veteran, I know I mentioned the PACE program. This one is for women, but there is the PASS program, which is for men. It's been running, I think, since last year. So if you go to passprogram.ca, it's ball hockey. It's freaking awesome. 9 different locations across Canada, and you're not going to be prodded or picked apart or anything like that. The goal of this program is to really get you involved with your military brothers yet again. It doesn't matter if you have any injuries. It is open to everybody and anybody. If you're a man, that's the PASS program. I strongly recommend you go check it out, passprogram.ca. And then the PACE program, if you're interested in hopping on and being involved in this study, don't forget it's a study. It's 100% free. You just have to partake in the study itself. You go to pace.study@ubc.ca. I'm going to be dropping all that in the show notes. So really excited about that because we all know where this could possibly go, right? We could potentially have PT, so exercise, as part of your recovery plan, as part of you leaving the forces, as part of transition. Because as we all know, and what I preach all the time, anima sana and corpore sano, okay? A healthy mind and a healthy body, and the mind follows the body. So we can do a ton of work on our mental game, right? Get the mind mechanics in there, start helping you address some trauma issues. But ultimately, we need to address the physical as well. We are a big holistic being that cannot just be treated at a spot level, so one instant at a time. Everything is interconnected. We need to address the fact that we have a very, very big need to be physically active and to be physically healthy, and that translates also into mental well-being. So that's one thing I want to go over today. We have also new merchandise that is in the works for the podcast. So shout out to Corey Hat, Mad Hat Industries. Thanks so much for sending me the original designs. They look freaking sick. So more to follow on that, folks. If you're looking to get some cool Hard to Kill podcast t-shirts, I would love to hear if you'd like one. So if you go to the Hard to Kill podcast on Facebook, you can start dropping me some comments, tag me, say, hey bro, yeah, count me in. That'd be freaking sweet. Next, we have the 30 to Lean challenge. You may not have heard about this. This was a challenge that I put together as a test. So I took 10 individuals, took them on a little journey for the last 30 days to lose 10 pounds. Let me tell you, it's going pretty well. So shout out to Paula, shout out to Tim, shout out to Steph. Everybody's losing weight. It's freaking awesome. And you know what? You don't need any crazy PT. We're just working on habits. This wraps up this week. Now, will I run it again? Oh, hell yeah. So again, if you're looking for a low speed, low drag program that doesn't require you to know how to do muscle ups and compound lifts, but you still want to lose weight, stay tuned, especially in the Hard to Kill Facebook group. Okay, that's where I'm going to be posting a lot of stuff about this, but I'm also going to be mentioning it here when this opens up again, and I do some tweaks and I improve the program so that you can get the most benefit from a program like 30 to Lean. Additionally, I want to shout out some awesome wins from some tribe members that are putting in the work and seeing results. JC, Hugo, Pete, you guys have all lost 10 pounds plus, some 20 pounds in the last few months, which is freaking unreal. So good on you for putting in the work. Good on you for getting fitter, getting healthier in the process, taking care of issues like your back issues, your aches and pains on top of losing weight. Awesome to see. Makes my job worth it. And I wanted to give a shout out to JP for starting his program this week, getting ready for a marathon. We're going to be chatting a bunch today about a few things that are going to be related to marathon, but good on you, JP, for taking the plunge, for getting after it and getting ready. And we're in week 1 and it's going to be awesome. Additionally, next week, I'm going to be running a webinar in the Hard to Kill Facebook group on how to get ready for course and selection. We all know these are coming up in the summer. Some of y'all are getting panicky. Oh crap, it's been 2 years. I'm not ready for PLQ. Oh crap, I'm not ready for name the course, name selection, whatever you're trying to go for. Spring's coming. All right. Time to get ready. So I'm going to be doing a little seminar. It's going to be held on Wednesday, next Wednesday, 2000 hours in the Hard to Kill Facebook group. Link in the show notes. Okay. The meat of today's rant is all about junk training. And lo and behold, I have some inspiration from Dr. Peter Attia. Surprise, surprise. I know if you listen to this podcast, I reference him a lot because he's in my wheelhouse. Like, he's in my brain. He's always putting out content that is just spot on. So I'm going to comment on it. He recently had on Ryan Hall. So let me just pull that up here. So Ryan Hall here, if you're taking a look, it's episode 199, Running, Overcoming Challenges, and Finding Success. Now, Ryan Hall is the fastest American ever to run the marathon in 2 hours, 4 minutes, and 58 seconds. That's how much I run my half marathon. Wow. Now, to put that in context, Kipchoge, I don't remember his first name, but that was the Kenyan individual that ran the world record for the marathon, which was sub 2, I believe, which is cuckoo bananas. If you can put that in context, like most of you have run, I can safely assume that, running a 5-minute kilometer is freaking fast, right? Well, imagine doing like a 4:10, right? Imagine running at a 4-minute per kilometer pace for 40 plus kilometers. That is so insane. I can't even wrap my head around it. Anyways, the reason why I bring this up is that the episode here with Ryan Hall, they chatted about things like training zones and the importance of being in a good training zone to improve things like cardiovascular endurance and muscular endurance. And what we typically do is like train in a garbage training zone. And I want to address that because I think it's really relevant to the webinar I'm going to be doing next week, but also what I see with not only myself, but having gone through marathon training and Ironman training, but also with respects to young guns, young bucks that think that smashing hard CrossFit workouts all the time is the way to get fitter. Now, that's going to be part of what I discuss here. So, and the scientific rationale behind why training in those hard zones is actually not benefiting you long-term for what you actually want to compete in, whether it's something with respect to the military, if you want to go on course, if you want to go on selection, or if you're just a normal human being that just wants to, do something like a 10K, a half marathon, or just wants to be healthy and wants to just have more longevity, right? So this is all applicable to what we're going to be talking about today. So I've got Peter Attia's podcast here. First thing I want to touch on is what are your aerobic zones, or I should say your metabolic pathways. Okay, so metabolic pathways are important to have a general understanding of. And my first introduction to this was in university when I was studying biology, but it never really coalesced and made any sense to me until I started looking at CrossFit. And CrossFit was great at allowing the science that could be relatively complex for those that aren't taking a bachelor's degree and distilling it to the everyman. And CrossFit.com was great for that. The CrossFit Journal was awesome for that. And so I was able to just put 2 and 2 together and be like, oh, now that makes sense. And let me just explain to you what I mean by the different energy pathways or the metabolic pathways. So up here on the screen, what I have, and if you're just listening to this on iTunes, on your favorite podcast player, you can head to the YouTube channel and it's at Dave Morrow and brackets Hard to Kill. And you can see what I'm posting here. But essentially, I'm posting a graph that has 3 different curves on it. The first curve is a high spike curve. So percentage of total energy is on the y-axis, and then you have time in seconds on the x-axis. So the first curve is really steep and drops off really fast. Okay, this is what we call the phosphocreatine pathway. And essentially what it does is it gives you the ability to have a maximal effort in about under 10 seconds. So imagine you have a sprint to do, right? Typically you have 100-meter dash sprinters, they run it in under 9 seconds. or under 10 seconds. Hey, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Usain Bolt did it in 9:24. Anyways, so you can see that's maximal effort, and that requires a certain metabolic pathway. Now, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of the actual pathway itself, but suffice it to say, this is a pathway that you can train and you can get better in because it forces you to use the phosphocreatine metabolism to get energy to your cells to do stuff. You surpass that 10 seconds, well, guess what? You're not going to be able to hold that threshold, that maximum effort threshold. You can't hold a 100-meter pace for 200 meters, 300 meters, 400 meters. I think we can all agree upon that. So therefore, you have to move into another metabolic zone. You have to move into another metabolic pathway in order to fuel you moving forward. And that next pathway, if we're looking at the graphs here, is less steep, but peaks out at around 60 seconds. Typically, you can go to 120 seconds-ish, so 2 minutes. This is what's called the glycolytic pathway. So this is the mid-range kind of zone where you can sustain a really high effort, not at a sprint, but close to it. So this is typically where we look at high-intensity training. So we're talking about HIIT, high-intensity interval training. What people tend to do wrong is you're doing high intensity for too long of a period of time. What's actually supposed to happen, if you want to train that glycolytic pathway, you need to do, that minute of work or even that 30 seconds of work and then take adequate time off. It's intervals. It's not meant to be long term and sustained heart rate for too long because that's oxidative training. And if we look at the other graph here, it's much less steep and it progresses and carries on for infinity technically. So anytime you surpass that 2 minutes, that 120 seconds of effort, now you're moving into the oxidative pathway. So that's what we typically call cardio. So when you go for a run, let's say that's at a moderate pace, you are now using the oxidative pathway. Now, any one of us that was in the military, if you're in the military, you know this pathway inside out and backwards. This is what we typically train in. The military, and especially the infantry, the base level of fitness needs to be aerobic. We walk long distances. We run long distances. We grind it out for days. This is an aerobic capacity issue. You need to be good baseline aerobically. That's why if you've been on course, and I've been on course numerous times, typically the high-speed football players would typically have a hard time at the beginning because they weren't used to that type of training. They weren't used to those long runs, those long periods of sustained effort until they switched over. Now, when I was a young buck, I didn't understand that, but they would typically have that point during the training phase, like it was 2-3 months, that they would just adapt, and they were athletes, they were fit, they were able to push through and just like everybody get through the course. They had that baseline strength, but they're used to that explosive, either, and for a football player especially, that phosphocreatine level of exertion, so that 10-second blast, as opposed to the oxidative blast or the oxidative long steady pace cardio that typically the military does. So that was all to say that now we have an understanding of the different metabolic zones and where you need to be in order to improve one or the other. And it really depends on your goals. I want to focus today more on the aerobic function, so building your aerobic capacity, because this is where I think a lot of us, now that we've seen a lot of stuff online, we've had experience to CrossFit, we think, well, I guess the best way to get my aerobic fitness up, so my cardiovascular fitness and even your muscular endurance up, is to do really hard, high intensity work for prolonged periods of time. And I want to dispel that myth. Okay, that's more bro science than anything, and you're doing the wrong thing in order to get yourself to the next level with respects to cardiovascular endurance. And having, JP now working on a marathon and having done 2 myself and an Ironman, I want to explain why it's so important to develop your cardiovascular endurance by using heart rate zone training. So let's look at what heart rate zone training is. So heart rate zone training, really simply put, and I'll just open up just the tab here. I like this one here. I have this opened up on Facebook. Whoops. Okay, so if we're looking at building your aerobic base, and Peter Attia goes into this in his podcast, you have to be in that zone 2. Now, I'm going to explain zone 2 as being in the aerobic zone. So that's 70 to 80% of your maximum heart rate. I'm going to refine that a little bit in just a bit, but let's just take that as our benchmark. Some will say, oh, that's not zone 2. Okay, I get it. There's no hard line science defining what zone's what, okay? But let's just assume for all intents and purposes, 70% to around 80% is your zone 2 heart rate zone. So in order to know your general maximum heart rate, the equation is typically 220 minus your age gives you your maximum beats per minute, okay? And if that's the case that for you, you know, like I'll use an example. Like for me, I'm 40, so therefore 180 beats per minute is typically what my maximal heart rate should be, okay? Now, that can fluctuate based on your actual fitness level, but typically your maximal heart rate declines with age, okay? So why zone 2? Well, zone 2 is what we typically call the aerobic zone. And if you've ever trained in zone 2, it is crazy slow. Like if you've done any amount of running, to start working in zone 2, it's like you are walking. And this is a big shift I had to make once LP, so shout out to LP Boudreaux for planning out my marathon, my Ironman training. To do all this zone 2 training was so hard. And to keep my heart rate in that zone, when you know you can go faster, it's psychologically difficult, but the benefits are amazing. And when you're doing marathon work or when you're doing anything where you're going to do an event that requires long distance endurance, you need to train in this zone. It builds the foundation, full stop. So if your goal is that, start working in zone 2. It doesn't mean all you do is zone 2, but the foundation, the actual foundation of your training needs to be focused around that zone 2 training. Okay, so the training's not that hard. You can hold a conversation while you actually run in zone 2 and you build your cardiovascular endurance. But how do you measure that you're actually getting fitter? Okay, that's a really important question because you could be doing all the zone 2 training, but are you actually getting fitter? Because it doesn't feel, especially for us infantry guys, and I say infantry because we typically have a more hard charger type attitude to everything. Like if you're not sucking gums and like puking at the end of a workout, you're like, oh, I didn't fucking work out. Okay, that's not the case, and I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of that 100%. If I don't feel like I'm burning at the end of a workout, I'm like I didn't get a workout. But with a bit of wisdom and maturity, now I realize, okay, doing an hour-long session in zone 2 is actually quite beneficial, or 35 minutes, doesn't matter. Now, how do you measure that? Okay, so that's another important concept. So I'm going to use a body of research that came from Phil Maffetone that I was introduced to by another podcast guest regarding his Ironman training. And it was really interesting because we discussed just how to measure your cardiovascular improvement. And in that case, using the maximal aerobic function test, which is what this individual, Phil Maffetone, came up with, was a really good way to measure that. So that was the episode with Rick Harper. Okay, so if you're curious, where we're talking about this in more detail, but let me just touch on the main points. So I talked about recently using your maximal heart rate equation as 220 minus your age gives you your maximal heart rate. Well, in this case here, the maximal aerobic function heart rate is basically giving you a maximal heart rate to be in the zone 2 area so that you can actually train your cardiovascular endurance, your aerobic pathway more efficiently. So big picture, it's 180 minus your age. Okay, now there's some modifiers, like if you've been training more than 2 years, if you're injured, if you're recovering from major illness, So these are things that you can add in. Now I've got this pulled up on the screen here, and you can find all this at philmaffetone.com 180 formula. This is exactly what I used to see if I was getting fitter. Now, while I was training for my Ironman, I also was full keto. I completely changed my diet, and it worked out beautifully. But one thing that's cool about being on keto is that it also improves your cardiovascular function. So how do you actually measure this? Well, you got to run in that zone. And in his example here, he does a 3-mile test. I was doing a 1-mile test, but either way, you can still figure it out. You need to measure your heart rate with a heart rate monitor on your chest because it's more accurate. Stay in the zone and run the exact same route every time. So I did a mile, and you had to be really well warmed up because you didn't want to skew your results. So I do the same warm up. I did it very scientifically. And what you're trying to do is see, hey, I'm running in the exact same heart rate zone for the exact same distance, and my time is going down. If your time is going down, that means you're cardiovascularly more fit. Does that make sense? You're controlling two of the variables, which is the distance, okay, and the heart rate. But what you're trying to improve, or what you should see improving, is the actual time it takes for you to complete that mile. Now, in a 3-mile test, your first mile should be the fastest and then should progressively just get a little bit slower. If at any point your test gets a little bit faster, let's say mile 2 or mile 3, that just means you weren't warmed up properly enough. Okay, so don't forget, this is all in like the zone 2 area. So you're not going to be huffing and puffing. You're going to be running really, really steady, but you just need to keep an eye on your watch and make sure you monitor your heart rate. So that's the maximal aerobic fitness test. Really, really great way to just measure your cardiovascular fitness and how it's progressing over time. You can do this every week. I was doing this every week. Okay, it's just a measure, and then you can track how much fitter you're getting, and it's impressive to see, and it gives you a little boost, right? Because it's a win when you see your cardiovascular fitness improving. And I guess what's the last thing I wanted to cover? I think that's it, guys. I think I've said enough. Yeah, that's it. So I guess to summarize, let's do less junk training. So let me explore that just a little bit more. What did I officially mean by junk training? I meant if your goal is to get cardiovascularly more fit and to do long distance events and to be a better soldier, you need to work on your cardiovascular fitness. And in order to do that, you need to stay in a certain zone of training. Now, what I didn't touch on is the high end stuff. The high end stuff is where your heart rate is substantially higher, okay, than zone 2. You're in the zone 4, 5. When you're doing those sprints, you need to ensure that you're actually sprinting, that you're actually at maximal capacity, that you're actually pushing your heart rate close to maximum for a very short period of time and taking ample rest. There you will improve, if you want to just call it globally, your anaerobic capacity. Okay, that is an important type of training as well, and will get you aerobically fitter as well. Okay, so you need to make sure you build all your metabolic pathways so that you're globally generally prepared for anything that's thrown at you, assuming that you're a soldier and assuming that you're just a generally prepared human being. For any elite athlete in a specific category of events, let's say a sprinter, they're not going to work on their cardio. Why would they? They are an elite sprinter. So take that with a grain of salt. But the overall majority of you, I'm assuming you're a generalist. So train as a generalist would and work on that cardio using the tools I just gave you here, but also sprinkle in some really high intensity stuff. But the key to high intensity stuff is to take ample breaks between the intervals. And I think where most people fail is they do a really hard CrossFit workout. It's a 20-minute AMRAP, right? And their heart rate's jacked up at like 175 the entire time, and they're just sucking gums. Okay, cool. But to do that every day, to do that as part of your regular routine, all you're going to do is incur tons of stress. And I've been in that pain cave before. I know what it's like to be doing, 4 CrossFit workouts a week and getting fatter and my joints hurt and not understanding why I'm not getting jacked and losing tons of body fat. Well, I finally found out that it's because my cortisol levels because I was so stressed out from such hard workouts and not feeding myself well enough, not resting enough, that I was just incurring way too much stress in order to recover and to be actually able to benefit from it. And once that wisdom set in, then I was able to actually start seeing body fat loss and actual strength gains. And so if you're in that boat, if you're like, man, I'm working like crazy, I don't understand why I'm not seeing the gains, maybe you're going too hard. Maybe you are jacking your heart rate up for every one of your workouts for too long of a period of time without ample rest. And your central nervous system is just like, bro, what are you doing? And your hormones, when under stress, you will produce a ton more cortisol. And cortisol is not all bad, but chronically it is. It stimulates the production of insulin. It then interferes with the ability for testosterone to do its job. It can keep you up at night, which then compounds things. This is a downward spiral of shit that you do not want to be in. Okay, so keep that in mind. Too hard at training all the time jacks up to cortisol, prevents you from actually seeing the gains. And if you want to get better at running and doing things that require aerobic capacity, then work in that zone 2 zone so that you can actually see the benefits and use the MAF test, the maximal aerobic fitness test, so that you can actually see the progress. So I hope that's beneficial. I'm going to be dropping a bunch of links here on YouTube, but also in the show notes on Apple iTunes. And if you have any questions, the best place to reach me, head to the Facebook group. So that link will be here in the podcast as well. So you can come join, ask a question, tag me or tag any of our coaches, Audrey or LP. They'll be glad to answer any of your questions. And folks, don't forget, as always, train hard, fight easy.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. You can find out more about training, nutrition, and mindset at davemorrow.net. Be sure to like us on Facebook and Instagram at Dave Morrow PT. And don't forget, strong people are hard to kill.